I was delighted to be invited to this conference on the future of television news, but unfortunately I can't make it. So Jeff said I could participate by video as long as I stuck to 3 rules. 1, don't talk about past achievements. 2, don't trash conventional television news. And 3, keep it under 3 minutes. I may have difficulty with all of those, but I'll try and stick to the 3rd one. Television, and television news specifically, are children of technology. Television news didn't come from nowhere. It came out of a technology of big cameras, expensive edits, and pushing information through the air or through cable. The architecture of television and television news was therefore a function of what that technology could do. In the last 30 years, that technology has changed radically, but the architecture of television news has basically remained unchanged for 30 years. You see, I haven't really trashed television news, I've just pointed it out. If we were going to reinvent television news based on the technology of 2014 and what's coming, we would have something very different. So while many of you are probably talking about minor corrections and the implications of the internet and things like that, my advice is trash the whole thing. Burn it to the ground and let's start over from scratch. As Gloria Swanson once said, if you're going to have a baby, you should have a new one. What then would television news look like based solely upon the technology that's available to us today? The best way to do this is to look at the most successful internet information companies, because news, after all, is an information business. And that would be things like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, eBay, Airbnb, TripAdvisor, companies with valuations of anywhere from $1 billion to $135 billion at current rates of valuation, none of them more than 10 years old. But all purely children of the technology that exists the same, and they do the same thing as television news in their own way. They go out in the world, they gather information, they process it, and they make it available to a viewership. That's what television news is supposed to do. There are now a handful of reporters, a handful of correspondents around the world gathering news in their own strange way, in a very expensive way, and particularly kind of not very interesting in a fairly predictable way. But what if we embraced this new technology and we did it in a completely different way? For example, if you look at Facebook, Internet, Twitter, eBay, all those things, they all have one thing in common. The thing they have in common is that 100% of their content comes from user-generated material. That is, there are no producers at eBay. There are no writers at Facebook going out and reporting on what you think is interesting, then writing it up and putting it on Facebook. If they did, those companies couldn't exist. There are no executive producers at eBay deciding on what we should lead with, because that doesn't make any sense either. Is it possible then to do television news in the same model as Facebook, eBay, and Instagram and all these other great successes? It certainly is. And the reason it's possible is because of this little device, which is obviously an iPhone or a smartphone. There are now 1.4 billion of these things in circulation around the world. And obviously they're not phones anymore, and while media companies think of them as platforms where you can read advertising, what these things actually are is they are nodes of content creation. That is, they are capable of creating video, editing it, uploading it, text, photographs, tweets, whatever you want, and putting it out to the world, anywhere in the world, for free. And there are 1.4 billion of these in circulation in the world right now, soon to be 3 billion. 3 billion nodes of content creation. 3 billion camera crews, if you will. Bill Keller, the managing editor of the New York Times, recently wrote in the Times that he loved his job because he had 35 correspondents or 75 correspondents in 35 bureaus around the world. That is pathetic. It is pathetic that an institution like the New York Times depend upon 75 people around the world when there are 1.4 billion people with the technical capacity to tell their own stories. How am I doing? Let's take a look at Iraq. We've been in Iraq for 12 years now. There are probably 2 or 3 million people in Iraq with smartphones capable of shooting video, uploading it with pictures and sharing it with the world. In those 12 years, how many times have you seen video from Iraqis on NBC or CBS News? Not to trash those news organizations, Jeff. How many times have you ever seen any of that video? How much of that video do you think is being produced on a daily basis that you don't see it? Why don't you see it? Because you don't trust what they say. You can't trust what an Iraqi whose town is being bombed actually has to say about it. You would rather send a correspondent from New York who doesn't speak the language, hasn't lived there, doesn't know the culture, doesn't know the history, doesn't know anyone, to report the news as they see it on your network and put it out. Well, that's why, not to trash television, television news sucks. I'm not really trashing it, I'm just making an editorial comment here. The opportunity for a television news organization to change the way they think. We are no longer sending people out in the world to gather material and bring it in. We have 1.4 billion people around the world who have things to say, and our job in television news now is to aggregate, to curate, to edit, and to present the entire spectrum of opinion from people who actually know what they're talking about. And if I were reinventing television news, that's what I would do. I'm out of time. If you have any questions, email me, or tweet me, or Facebook me, or any of those other ways that the real news business takes place today. Thanks. See ya.